In an ideal world, one might enjoy the thrill of exploding volcanoes and the sight of dinosaurs roaming freely, completely uninterested in anyone's affairs. The tale opened in a remote part of this wretched world, deep within a forest that appeared to have been shaped by an artist in a foul mood. Amidst the fallen bodies of fighters, a lone figure moved carefully, picking a path through the carnage as though taking a grim and ill-fated walk at dawn. Without warning, a fearsome creature with luminous red eyes leapt toward an unsuspecting young man. The boy's shock and fear were as intense as if he had just learned that his internet access was gone. Without warning, intense clashes erupted as the brave humans confronted the ruthless, wild beasts. As the turmoil swirled around, a blue light flickered in the young hero's eyes, awakening a hidden strength within, just as often unfolds in tales like this. He darted forward with a speed that all reason, wielding his sword with such expert precision that even the most talented sushi chef would pale in comparison, cutting through the air with rapid, forceful blows. He shattered each creature that blocked his path into tiny fragments. However, all the heroic action turned out to be nothing more than an exaggerated advertisement playing on a massive screen among the city's wreckage, showcasing the dispatch to the world's initiative and labeling it as the next big step for humanity. A brown-haired youth stood before the advertisement, his gaze fixed on the bold words urging him to apply, his mind drifting into a distant daydream. Just as his fantasy of becoming a legendary hero was about to reach its peak, a firm grip yanked him back to the harshness of the real world. Spinning around, he faced his employer, a weary elder whose joy had faded years ago, berating him with a booming voice, demanding to know why he was idly gazing off instead of getting back to work. The young man lowered his head in a gesture of apology as his boss carried on with his familiar rant, insisting that the real issue with today's young people was their bizarre ambitions, which he considered completely pointless. Without allowing for any disagreement, the man instructed him with a firm voice to quickly clear away the climbing vines. The protagonist promptly, grabbing a small sickle, his chosen tool in his fight against joblessness, and headed off to complete the task. Worry consumed him, as he dreaded the possibility of losing his job once more. It was obvious to him that attracting notice on the very first day would be a mistake. The persistent muttering of his supervisor filled the air, echoing through his days like an unwelcome melody that underscored his unhappiness. Without warning, the old man stopped talking. Amazement filled his face as his eyes grew wide, watching the young man clear away the plants faster and more skillfully than anyone he had ever seen. Within a short span of time, every one of those troublesome plants had been gathered up and stuffed into oversized bags. For the first time, the elderly man revealed his respect, acknowledging how uncommon it was to encounter a diligent youth like him nowadays. As a reward, he allowed the young man to leave work ahead of schedule and return home early. The young man slung the bag over his shoulder. Although someone had praised him, his expression turned somber. He believed that being part of the heroic dispatch was only a far-off fantasy for someone in his position. It is eventually revealed that Earth had met its end, stripped of life and energy, much like an online game that ceases to exist once its servers are turned off. At that moment, an enigmatic and all-powerful figure emerged, presenting a magical remedy and sending the protagonist to a different realm. The group known as the Dispatched, once hailed as heroes, left their devastated home planet behind to seek refuge on distant worlds. In their journey, they struggled to salvage the remnants of Earth's life, returning with fragments of hope and vitality as precious keepsakes. The young man gripped his sickle tightly as he gazed out toward the far-off horizon. He questioned, with a hint of sarcasm, whether he might ever join the ranks of those superheroes. Once his tasks were complete, he wandered along the empty streets with a weary sigh, his sole source of hope resting on the possibility of being summoned the next day to clear away additional plants. He approached a busy building filled with a throng of people. With great effort, they managed to force their way through the crowd. He eventually arrived at the desk of a government worker, where a young man greeted him and gave his name as. He informed the staff member that he was there to see if there had been any updates regarding the family reunion case he had asked them to look into. The employee looked at his monitor, where information about his investigation deposit was shown. The display made it clear that he had already spent a large amount of money trying to locate his missing family, yet the funds remaining were not enough. Despite the chill in the air, the employee made it clear to him that this respected establishment did not provide its services without payment. He recommended that the man return once he had the funds, then summoned the following person waiting impatiently in the never-ending line. At the same time, a different man hurried through the crowd, desperately seeking answers, pleading for any clue, even just the name of the place that had taken his family away. As was often the case, a voice from the furious crowd shouted at him, making it clear that he wasn't alone in facing hardship. Meanwhile, managed to silently blend into the background, escaping the chaos of the hopeless gathering. He stepped into his dimly lit house and spoke out, but his words echoed back to him with no response. The only welcome he received was the sight of a lone, empty food can slowly rolling across the floor, emphasizing the loneliness of the moment. A surge of memories overwhelmed him as he recalled that his father had once been a prominent returnee and a genuine hero. As the planet's condition continued to decline, he found himself sent out once more, this time on a mission that appeared to offer little chance of return. He never returned. He recalled how his mother had once assured him she would leave with his grandmother to join his father, vowing she would be back soon and urging him to wait only a short while. Apparently, when they promised to return in a few days, it was just another way of saying they would never come back. In the end, she vanished as well, abandoning him to survive on his own. After so many years, his recollections of them had faded so much that even trying to remember their faces felt nearly impossible. Without warning, his surroundings seemed to come alive, swaying and trembling as if caught in a wild dance. A dazzling light burst forth, leaving him puzzled and irritated as he tried to figure out what was causing all the chaos. A powerful quake hurled him to the other side of the room, leaving him sprawled helplessly like a discarded toy. His head slammed against the wall. As a final, humorous twist to the tragedy, a clock toppled onto him. Once the surprise wore off and awareness slowly returned. He was confused and in pain, struggling to understand what had just occurred as his head throbbed intensely. He picked up his phone and saw an emergency notification explaining that an earthquake and bright flash had happened because a returning hero had come back. Just beneath that alert, another urgent headline appeared, stunning him even more than the collapsed wall had. The famous S-Class hero was officially declaring that he would be retiring. As he scanned the news, uncertainty filled his mind, leaving him puzzled by what he read. During a broadcast interview, the wounded returnee made an appearance, admitting that he was unable to safeguard the god, had witnessed the loss of all his allies, and felt compelled to come back by himself, burdened by shame. Due to this tremendous setback, he felt unworthy and unwilling to accept any more missions. As a result, he declared his retirement, urging everyone to keep believing and to take responsibility for safeguarding the Earth in his absence. Grim news stories soon appeared, questioning Earth's chances of survival as the heroes began to retreat, particularly with the population shrinking to under 500 million. The hero slumped in his dimly lit room, weighed down by the sting of a failed mission and a forced retirement that couldn't have come at a worse moment. As hopelessness settled over him, an unexpected noise echoed from the direction of the door. The thought crossed his mind, who would show up so late? He realized he had no friends to expect. With exhaustion weighing on him, he made his way to the door, each step heavy and slow. Suddenly an unusual animal made its entrance, a rabbit dressed in a smart suit and tie. The rabbit courteously inquired about the whereabouts of Mr. He slowly pushed the door open, bracing himself for what he imagined might be the most bizarre prank anyone had ever played. The sight was so strange that it made them stop abruptly, unable to move. The sudden fright caused him to stumble and collapse onto his back, his voice echoing loudly in a terrified scream. The very last thing he could have imagined after such a terrible day was discovering a rabbit that could talk sitting right outside his door. The rabbit-like being attempted to soothe the protagonist, urging him to stay silent because there was exciting information to share. With great excitement, the creature offered heartfelt congratulations, announcing that the main character had been selected to become a dispatched, delivering the news with the same energy someone might have after winning a grand prize. Shan stared at the rabbit, bewildered, his mind racing to make sense of the bizarre scene. Rabbits weren't supposed to talk, let alone discuss interstellar careers. The rabbit's face reflected a deep awareness of his own bewilderment, as if he had spent considerable time perfecting that very look. He confidently confirmed that the choice to select him was genuine and unquestionable. To back up his claim, he produced an authentic identification card from the Global Dispatch Support Center and proposed they move to a different place if there were still any suspicions that this was a trick. While they strolled along, the rabbit turned to and inquired about any unique abilities he might possess, noting that humans usually have at least one remarkable skill. Responded candidly, admitting that, as the rabbit was likely already aware, he lacked any qualifications for the task at hand. He admitted that his main talent was in pruning trees and flowers, and doubted that a super gardener would be a popular class in different worlds. The rabbit's expression turned exaggeratedly surprised, prompting to question whether this was truly new information to him. The rabbit swiftly regained composure, responding with calm diplomacy and gently conveying that everything was all right, suggesting that all events occur with purpose. He calmly explained that being chosen was still certain, easing any concerns, which led to express gratitude for the creature's surprising encouragement. He gazed in awe at his surroundings, hardly able to grasp that he had at last reached the dispatch center. A sense of hope washed over him as he realized this could be the opportunity he had waited for to turn his unhappy life around. The rabbit proposed that they should pass through an enormous, ornate doorway in order to keep talking. He stood captivated by the enormous door, his mind filled with dreams of hidden realms and greatness waiting just beyond its threshold. Summoning every ounce of strength, he attempted to force the enormous door open, yet it remained firmly closed. The rabbit, observing him with calm indifference, inquired about his actions and clarified that the true entrance was actually located in a completely different place. She gestured toward a tiny door, crafted just right for a rabbit to fit through. Shun's frustration grew as he stared at the tiny opening, doubting how anyone could fit through such a small space. The rabbit assured him it would be simple for him to get inside. Annoyed, Shun shouted back, pointing out that the rabbit found it easy only because he was, after all, a rabbit. He was overwhelmed with frustration and declared his intention to leave, deciding that he could no longer tolerate the situation. The rabbit halted his actions, pointing out that he had already failed all the earlier tests and was considered unfit. With a hint of sarcasm, the rabbit questioned whether he truly believed such a chance would present itself to him again. He explained that the words he spoke were actually Shan's own thoughts, which had been echoing in his mind. He showed how much he regretted his choice to leave, especially after being selected through such a challenging process. Ultimately, he accepted what was to come, dropping onto his hands and knees before starting to crawl through the tiny opening, feeling more embarrassed than he ever had in his life. Inside, the rabbit urged him to move faster, showing no regard for how he felt. Once he succeeded in entering, he rose to his feet and realized the room was surprisingly plain, lacking anything remarkable. The rabbit explained that there was an ideal world designed especially for him. She clarified that various worlds existed, each tailored for different individuals, and then excitedly presented him with an opportunity to enter a world called land grabbing, which featured a unique template system. Shan's eyebrows drew together in confusion as he heard a name that reminded him of a low-budget video game, and at the same time, the rabbit's nerves showed as it worried Shan might know something about this world. He confessed his unfamiliarity with the place, his voice tinged with concern as he questioned whether it was somewhere unusual, while at the same moment, a sly grin began to spread across the rabbit's face. The rabbit chuckled, explaining that this world currently held the highest popularity, and its greatest advantage lay in being safeguarded by a deity. When Shun heard the mention of a god, he stopped moving, struck by the memory that Returnee, the person who had lost control on the news, had worshipped a god as well. The rabbit hurried to calm him, firmly maintaining that these events were unrelated to the past mishaps, and that he had no cause for concern, none whatsoever. At this moment the true challenge unfolded. With careful words, Shan inquired about who the rabbit referred to as a god, secretly anticipating an impressive-sounding title. The rabbit clarified that, based on the laws of the universe's bureaucracy, the selection of a god happened entirely by chance. However, since luck seemed to be on his side that day, he would become the chosen one if he agreed to participate immediately. He was about to receive a unique opportunity to make his own decision. Acting with the confidence of a seasoned street magician, he presented 3 matching cards and inquired if the other was prepared to decide his own fate. The hero paused, openly acknowledging his complete lack of experience in selecting patron gods and confessing uncertainty about the potential trouble he could unwittingly invite. The rabbit pressed him to choose quickly, emphasizing that such a chance would not come again and warning that there was little time left. Shen came to understand that opportunities like this were rare, and at last agreed to take the chance. He quietly berated himself for pausing so foolishly. With a resolute gesture, as though he were risking everything he had, he selected a card from the deck. A towering skeleton monster, its eye sockets glowing with eerie purple light, materialized in front of him, commanding a horde of undead followers. The card displayed the god of banishment with a probability of 44%, leaving him so astonished and overwhelmed that he nearly choked in disbelief. The rabbit, speaking in a detached tone, clarified that what he saw was merely a demonstration of the product, and silently questioned his astonishment. Shun, still gripped by fear, responded by wondering aloud what sort of deity would make an entrance so frightening that it seemed straight out of a horror film. He expressed his concerns, thinking that the title God of Banishment carried an ominous tone and seemed to promise only misfortune. He nervously wondered aloud if he might be allowed to draw once more, his voice tinged with uncertainty. The rabbit responded right away, happily granting permission, leaving him feeling both grateful and a bit bewildered. He reached for a new card, silently wishing that luck would favor him with a different outcome this round. He believed he would receive a deity who cherished both flowers and tranquility. Upon realizing that the card drawn was once again the god of banishment, now bearing an increased probability of 45%, he let out a cry filled with both frustration and hopelessness. He burst out furiously at the rabbit, leveling accusations of trickery and dishonesty, and puzzling over how the rabbit managed to draw the same disastrous god without fail. The rabbit's playful demeanor vanished, replaced by a grave expression as it assured him that the cards were perfectly fine. Fixing him with an intense stare, the rabbit silently pressed the importance of the situation, making it clear that he needed to grasp the true meaning behind it all. Shan quickly stepped back, startled by how the adorable rabbit's demeanor had changed so unexpectedly. The rabbit declared that he had reached his final opportunity and urged the other to make a careful decision now. He squeezed his eyes shut and silently pleaded with the universe, hoping desperately that the card would not reveal bad news once more. He selected his final card, and in that instant a gentle green glow surrounded him, filling him with warmth and reassurance. He blinked awake and was overwhelmed with happiness when he saw that, at last, he had received a new card. The card displayed the goddess of abundance, an outcome so rare that its odds were only 1 in a billion. Despite the effects appearing minor on paper, he was filled with excitement at obtaining such a rare item. His mind instantly conjured up an image of the goddess of abundance as an exceptionally attractive woman, causing a silly and inappropriate grin to spread across his face. Noticing this, the rabbit shot him a look of pure revulsion and questioned his thoughts, calling his expression revolting. Following an unusual hush, the rabbit caught him off guard by inquiring if he wanted another opportunity to sketch. His eyes widened in astonishment at the unexpected proposal. He recalled to the rabbit that a moment ago he had declared it was his final opportunity. Then, with curiosity, wondered aloud what the consequences would be if he selected the card representing the goddess of abundance. Shan found himself ensnared in a trap from which there appeared to be no escape. Earlier, a sly rabbit had tempted him with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to select a goddess of extraordinary beauty. However, there was an irritating twist. He was required to set out on a perilous quest without delay. However, there was no need for concern, as the rabbit had devised a brilliant marketing strategy. The rabbit intended to persuade him by presenting this as his chance to rise above his unfortunate role as a lowly dispatched worker, transforming instead into a celebrated returnee who would inspire everyone. To entice further, he describes an appealing vision of days ahead, picturing himself as a celebrated national hero, admired by all and possibly honored as the one who saves humanity. It is a promise almost impossible to decline. With a cunning grin, the rabbit finished presenting his proposal, confidently promising that an entirely different future lay ahead if the offer was accepted, and urged careful consideration of such generosity. Following an intense period of pondering life's bigger questions, the protagonist comes to a brilliant realization. He recognizes that his existence has become dull, and that, unless he acts on this chance before him, he may remain trapped in a cycle of disappointment without end. Summoning uncommon bravery, he recognizes that the moment to choose his destiny has finally arrived. Within moments, a vibrant message bursts onto the scene, celebrating his new role as the devoted follower of the goddess of abundance. He realized that the moment to finally see her had arrived. A beautiful woman with striking green hair stood in front of him, her face hidden in darkness as though the funds had fallen short to reveal her features. She greets him, seeing him as someone who might be sent out on an assignment. He realized the title was more modest than he had anticipated. The celestial image faded away in an instant, transforming itself into a playing card. The hero lay motionless on the ground, dazed and uncertain whether the vision before him was reality or merely a figment of his imagination. It made no difference to him. A surge of fake excitement sparked within his chest, filling him with the sudden belief that he could overcome any challenge as long as this enigmatic goddess remained by his side. Brimming with the excitement of someone new to adventure, he turned to the rabbit, seeking guidance for what to do next. The rabbit, with a sly smile, commended his so-called wisdom, though there was a hint that he really meant to call it foolishness. The rabbit declared that their journey was about to begin, but rather than being greeted by a majestic golden gate worthy of champions, the group found themselves staring at a swirling purple vortex that resembled a doorway to the underworld. The hero let out a long, desperate scream, overwhelmed by the chaos unfolding around him. Yet before he could gather his thoughts, the ravenous gate began to drag him closer, its pull relentless and impatient. With youthful worry, he questioned the rabbit about whether they truly intended to enter the menacing-looking structure. The rabbit responded by teasing him for his innocence, sarcastically pondering how a vortex could possess emotions, before encouraging him to appreciate the swirling sight's unique beauty. From his perspective, a dark void stretched before him, threatening to drag him into the most terrifying experience he had ever faced. In a burst of unexpected bravery, Shan chooses to stand her ground. He made a bold promise to show everyone that he was more than just someone who failed. Summoning every ounce of bravery, he prepared to embark on his journey toward greatness. But before he could move, the rabbit delivered a forceful kick, propelling him directly into the embrace of uncertainty. As he plummeted downward, his voice filled the air with an array of surprisingly poetic insults directed at his fluffy companion. Meanwhile, the rabbit lifted a paw in farewell, its gesture conveying warm wishes for a safe adventure to the courageous hero. A strange voice suddenly questioned the rabbit, curious about why it had chosen such a forceful method to motivate someone. The rabbit explained that it was not permitted to step in directly, but apparently giving a strong kick from behind was acceptable. The voice placed the blame on the rabbit, emphasizing that losing this boy was not an option. It questioned whether the rabbit continued to remain loyal to the god that had already let him down. The answer is yes, showing that foolishness isn't unique to humans alone. At the same time, the protagonist found themselves arriving in an unfamiliar realm, where a digital notification appeared before them, delivering unsettling news. They soon realized in surprise that the small percentage did not indicate how rarely the goddess appeared, but instead reflected how little power she actually held. The hero let out a legendary cry as the realization hit him. He had picked a goddess whose power was as weak as a phone's battery on the verge of shutting down. At that instant, he crashes to the ground with tremendous impact. He sat among the wreckage, reflecting on the brilliance of his past choices and wondering how such crucial information had only come to him when it was far too late. The thought crossed his mind that this was truly an example of outstanding customer service. The hero found himself surrounded by the ruins that had once promised to become his new kingdom, a sense of despair settling over him. Without meaning to, he burst into uncontrollable laughter, his reaction seeming entirely instinctive. At last, he understood just how disastrous the situation was, one he had eagerly plunged into without hesitation. The situation became even more complicated when a system notification materialized in front of him, highlighting his earlier decision to select the goddess of abundance, a deity whose influence was nearly negligible. He surveyed the crumbling temple standing amidst the desolate landscape, his thoughts laced with sardonic disbelief as he questioned where the promised prosperity could be found in a place that appeared to have endured endless years of hunger. A new system window soon materialized, formally introducing him to the world of land acquisition through a templated system. It bestowed upon him the title of messenger for a goddess, though her name was so carelessly misspelled that it was almost unrecognizable. The system clearly stated that his purpose was to claim as much territory as he could on her behalf. He spotted a mistake in the goddess's name, and theorized that the system might have failed to recognize it because his faction was too small. He realized that remaining idle and feeling sorry for himself would accomplish nothing, so he resolved to investigate his surroundings. There was a chance he might encounter the famed goddess he had heard about. While he walked along, his eyes caught sight of a sickle resting on the ground, positioned as though it had been placed there just for him to find. He reached down and lifted the object, astonished to find it in this place. Yet, as he held it, an unexpected sense of ease washed over him, a comforting recognition, as though he had reunited with a companion from his troubled former life. Without warning, an enormous beast emerged from the shadows behind him, its eyes shining brightly and piercing through the gloom. Terror rooted him to the spot, as he understood that the creature before him was an actual monster. A wave of panic washed over him as he realized a monster had shown up before he'd even met his divine employer. The thought of losing his life in such an absurd situation was something he simply refused to accept. In a bold and frantic effort to protect himself, he lifted the sickle high and brandished it at the menacing beast, hoping to ward it off. He hadn't expected to discover that the creature he feared was not a frightening monster after all. The tiny hamster quivered in terror, its watery eyes brimming with fright. He found himself puzzled, unable to understand why such an adorable animal would be labeled a monster. Instead of appearing dangerous, the little being looked terrified, as if it might collapse from fright at any moment. A fleeting sense of greed flickered through his thoughts. He wondered if capturing the creature, which the system had labeled as a monster, might earn him a valuable prize. The helpless hamster quivered with fear under the intense, hungry stare, its tiny limbs flailing desperately as it let out shrill cries of panic. Shun chose not to bother with it at the moment, figuring it was harmless since it wasn't posing any threat to him. Deep down, he couldn't help but admit to himself that he thought it looked rather adorable. Without warning, he noticed the hamster darting off in the opposite direction. He observed that the creature would pause occasionally, glancing back at him, almost as though it was beckoning him to come along. With no other ideas coming to mind, he broke into a run, chasing after it. He marveled at how fast the tiny creature moved, his mind racing with curiosity about what fresh trouble it might be leading him toward. After some time spent racing along, they arrived at a modest waterfall where crystal-clear water cascaded gently down. A wave of relief washed over him as he gathered the water, possibly the only plentiful resource left in this desolate world, and poured it into a bottle. After satisfying his thirst, he took a seat to relax and wondered aloud to the hamster whether this was its home. With a grave expression, he inquired whether it was aware of the whereabouts of the goddess, the one renowned for her immense generosity. The hamster remained preoccupied with grooming itself, leading to understand that trying to communicate logically with the small creature would be futile. The hamster, acting as his informal guide, squeaked once more, making it clear that the tour was far from finished. Shan, curious and wary, chose to trail behind the creature once more, wondering what fresh misfortune it might bring his way. On this occasion, the hamster guided him toward an enormous, awe-inspiring tree. He paused to take in the plant's impressive size, but his admiration faded as he realized it was utterly lifeless and withered, reminding him of the barren trees he had seen back on Earth. Near the roots of the tree, he noticed an unusual object protruding from the earth. He soon realized he had accidentally crushed a dried-out ginseng root beneath his foot, puzzled by how a plant like that could exist in such a barren area. Just then, the hamster emitted a terrified squeal, as though everything it knew had come crashing down. With a playful tone, offered an apology to the creature and wondered aloud if the root belonged to the hamster as a cherished companion. Just then, a digital message popped up in front of him, offering congratulations for finding the region's deity. He glanced about the area, puzzled, trying to figure out where the goddess he was meant to discover might be. The hamster, eager to be noticed, began gnawing on the boy's foot in a frantic bid to draw his focus. Annoyed, he snatched it up with his hand, explaining that he was currently searching for a god and would have time to play later. The hamster kept shrieking and struggling, making desperate attempts to clarify what was happening. Slowly started to grasp the point being made, questioning in his mind whether his interpretation was accurate. He stared in disbelief, piecing together the clues, and questioned whether the shriveled ginseng root before him might truly be the god in disguise. He could not accept such an absurd thought, since the goddess he had been promised represented prosperity and grace, making it unthinkable for her to resemble nothing more than a withered plant. While he remained trapped in disbelief, the ginseng root lying on the ground started to glow softly with a gentle green hue. At once, the memory of the breathtaking goddess he had witnessed flashed through his mind. The hamster's eyes caught a tiny message at the base of the picture, something he had missed earlier. The note warned that the image might not match the real item, a detail that made his sense of dread even stronger. He collapsed to the ground, overwhelmed by hopelessness as the truth dawned on him. Every sign had pointed to his own foolishness. The schemes involving land acquisition and the calculated percentages had never been coincidental. Instead, it revealed how much power each god held, with their influence expanding as their lands grew larger. He dismissed the recurring god of banishment cards, assuming they were just a system error, unaware that they actually came from the most formidable deities in existence. He realized that the goddess he worshipped had been reduced to this pitiful state because she had lost every bit of her territory and power. He couldn't help but question the reason she was still asleep. A chilling realization struck him as he wondered if stepping on her had been the act that ultimately took her life. Driven by regret over his serious error, he chose to give her water, noticing how parched she appeared. He tipped his bottle, letting water flow over the ginseng root, and watched as it shone even brighter. The vivid glow convinced him that his clever strategy was taking effect. His excitement intensified, leading him to keep adding water without pause, oblivious to the frantic pleas of the frightened hamster desperately attempting to intervene. Without warning, the ginseng root began to speak, remarking on how invigorated it felt from the water, an experience it hadn't enjoyed for many years. However, the voice's mood quickly shifted, expressing discomfort about the increasing amount of water. The plea soon shifted into a desperate call for rescue, claiming it was on the verge of drowning and would suffocate beneath the water. After ceased his desperate attempts to submerge her, the goddess regained consciousness. Seeing this, he celebrated clumsily, overjoyed at repairing the very thing he had nearly destroyed. He greeted her with a forced politeness, stating his name and declaring himself the messenger of abundance, as though he were formally presenting his qualifications. However, his happiness quickly faded when he realized that his primary goddess was struggling to move at all. He felt uncertain, since there were no guidelines or directions to help him figure out his next steps. A familiar system window materialized before him, presenting guidance on how he could enhance his abilities through skill mastery. He hadn't expected to have any abilities at all, so discovering them caught him off guard. As he looked through the list, one particular skill stood out, Blessing of Abundance. Judging by its name, he figured it must help plants grow more plentifully, which seemed logical. He soon discovered an additional, under the same blessing, labeled Decapitation, and the gruesome title left him deeply unsettled and worried. Without delay, he pictured a frightening image of a guillotine in his mind, his thoughts racing with fear as he questioned whether achieving wealth for everyone required destroying the wealthy. He struggled to steady his nerves, puzzled over the reason the goddess of abundance had granted him such a destructive ability. Seeking clarity, he looked toward the goddess and questioned whether the decapitation skill truly held the deadly meaning he suspected. He grew more anxious when she remained silent, and he asked again, this time more urgently, whether she truly wanted him to behead living beings. She fixed him with a serious gaze, prompting his sharp intellect to analyze the situation. He reasoned that because his goddess was connected to farming, her domain could also cover raising animals. With that thought, he speculated that the ability in question could involve skills like butchering and slaughtering livestock. As he watched the small hamster scurry around with innocent joy, a chilling realization crept into his mind about the grim destiny the unsuspecting creature would soon face. He questioned whether caring for this tiny animal might be his very first real assignment. He gazed at the object with a heavy sense of remorse, silently expressing his apologies for the actions he was about to take. He lifted the sickle high above the trembling hamster, forcing himself to believe that he was left with no alternative, for he served as the goddess's messenger and was bound to fulfill her commands. Just as he was about to make a reckless mistake, the goddess suddenly appeared, swiftly knocking the hamster aside and rescuing it from the consequences of her messenger's misguided loyalty. He attempted to explain himself, claiming reluctance, but insisting that his actions were motivated by her sake and the promise of plenty. The frightened hamster cowered behind the goddess, seeking her protection. Without warning, both individuals erupted into screams, frantically gesturing for to turn around and see what was behind him. He felt a jolt of surprise as he examined the object, curiosity growing as he tried to figure out its purpose. A massive creature, its form composed of dark, viscous slime and marked by a pair of shining eyes, stood looming before him. Fear gripped both the goddess and the hamster, causing them to shake uncontrollably. Shan came to understand that he had been mistaken all along. It wasn't the hamster that was the monster, but rather the terrifying being that had just shown itself. He questioned whether he had the strength to confront something this enormous. He clenched his beloved sickle even, the weapon he trusted most in every conflict, and resolved that he must stand his ground and face the fight. As he charged at the creature, a sudden realization struck him. Its vulnerable spot stood out to him, sharply illuminated as though a spotlight had been cast on it. A system notification suddenly popped up, informing him that the decapitation skill was now available for use. Acted decisively, unleashing the skill and swinging the sickle with force at the monster. He succeeded in breaking it into two separate pieces. In a single instant, the goddess and the hamster watched in awe as it was utterly obliterated. Once the monster had been vanquished against all odds, hurried over to the goddess, eager to confirm her safety, embodying the actions of a true hero who had deliberately come to the rescue. He realized that the tiny hamster he had nearly harmed just moments ago was now courageously standing between him and the goddess, determined to shield her. Crushed by the weight of his own mistake, he lowered himself until his forehead touched the floor, expressing his remorse again and again for having acted so thoughtlessly. With genuine humility, they pleaded for forgiveness on behalf of their misguided messenger. Shan sensed that the hamster had chosen to let go of its grudge, though it was possible the tiny creature was simply too frightened to protest. Grateful, Shan expressed heartfelt thanks and settled on the name for the hamster. He wanted to know what it thought about the new name. The person explained to the creature that it needed a name because they would now share a home, and appeared overjoyed by this news. A familiar system window popped up, notifying him that his skill had once again caused the monster's head to be given as an automatic sacrifice. The message also confirmed that he had now hunted one immortal demon. He discovered that the creature he had slain bore the title of Immortal Demon, which struck him as an odd and impressive name for something that had been so simple to vanquish. Suddenly, new details emerged, revealing that these sacrifices were connected to the goddess herself. He glanced in the direction of his goddess and noticed, with some astonishment, that she now appeared even more radiant and lively than before. Using his sharp mind, he reasoned that by persistently hunting these feeble creatures and presenting them as offerings, the goddess could possibly return to the majestic appearance he remembered from the advertisement. Inspired by the prospect, he eagerly assured the goddess of his intention to hunt additional creatures for her. With a newfound sense of hope and purpose lighting his way, he departed on his quest to seek out more monsters. Upon arriving at the spot he had aimed for, he came to a halt. Another window materialized before him, revealing the presence of mysterious points available for his use, though it clearly stated that these points were non-transferable. He was unsure of when he had received these points, but figured they were beneficial and chose not to dwell on the matter any longer. He entered a zone teeming with monsters and realized he needed to eliminate them before moving on. He was filled with confidence, knowing his abilities were both strong and simple to control. The creatures drifted forward at such a sluggish pace that it seemed as if they were merely taking a leisurely walk. He unleashed his decapitation skill, effortlessly eliminating the entire group in an instant. A fresh system notification popped up, verifying that he really did earn points from defeating monsters. Feeling a surge of satisfaction, he resolved to embark on a quest to hunt down 100 monsters. After a while, perched contentedly on his shoulder, radiating happiness, he began to stroke the animal, acting as though it had been responsible for all the effort. Once he had slain his 101st creature, he couldn't help but question the name Immortal Demons, since each one had fallen with surprising ease. He chose to set aside the mystery for now, planning to investigate it after he finished his hunt. He went back to the goddess and noticed that her radiance and beauty had increased remarkably. The outcome of the hunt exceeded his expectations, filling him with happiness and fueling his hope that she would soon return to her original form. He started to consider what he should do next as the goddess silently gestured toward the tree. He questioned whether she hoped to be placed on it, so he lifted her gently. As the goddess approached the tree, she reached out her delicate hand and let her fingers brush against its bark. The goddess gestured toward him and then at the tree, using obvious signs to urge the worker to take action and be helpful. Just as he was thinking, a system window suddenly appeared, informing him that the Blessing of Abundance skill was now available for his use. Another message appeared, clarifying that every blessing skill required points to use, since nothing in the world came without a cost. Suddenly realized that he needed to rely on a newfound ability he hadn't even been aware of just moments earlier. A vivid emerald light started to shine. He chose to spend every single point he had carefully collected from defeating those unfortunate monsters. With every ounce of strength, he focused his will on the barren tree, channeling the power of the Blessing of Abundance. A surge of energy poured out from his hands, and within seconds, a remarkable transformation began to unfold. The massive tree came back to life in a sudden, dramatic surge. Its limbs stretched outward, fresh leaves unfurled, and vibrant fruit quickly appeared, as if putting on a lively performance. Ripe red fruits shimmered beneath the canopy of vibrant green leaves. Could hardly believe his eyes when he realized the fruit in front of him were actually apples. He reached for an apple, surprised by how unusually large and heavy it felt in his hand. Even before Earth's destruction, he had never encountered an apple quite like this. Even though he was eager to eat it right away, he managed to hold himself back. He recalled his responsibilities as a loyal messenger and chose to present the first harvest to his goddess as an offering. He set the apple down before her and shared his wish for her to regain her splendid true appearance one day, yet he also remarked that she looked quite adorable as a root. Without warning, he witnessed the goddess consume the apple in an eerie manner, her form unfolding like a predatory blossom as she swallowed the whole fruit in a heartbeat. The experience overwhelmed him, filling him with disbelief and uncertainty. He realized it was wise to avoid upsetting her whenever she ate with such intensity. Once that was settled, he concluded that the moment had come for both him and to claim their portion of the treasure. He lifted the apple to his mouth and sank his teeth into its crisp flesh. A surge of joy filled him as he savored the incredible flavor, something completely new to his senses. From afar, the goddess observed him, her expression frozen in disbelief. She found herself puzzled by how the boy could have defeated monsters and brought a massive tree back to life all within a single day. In her mind, she thought of him as a boy with the wild demeanor of a beast. She started to remember the hardships she had endured before. The Abundance faction once held significant influence, providing food for people everywhere, and their authority stemmed from producing the finest crops anyone had ever seen. As the malicious Corruption faction grew in strength and spread across other groups like an uncontrollable disease, the once thriving Abundance faction found themselves overpowered and forced to escape. To stay alive, the Abundance faction gave up on agriculture and attempted to rely on hunting monsters instead. Since they were used to working the land instead of fighting, they stood no chance in battle and ended up losing all that they had. In a final attempt to survive, they transformed their simple harvest ability into a more lethal decapitation skill. However, the Abundance faction's destiny had already been determined, and their downfall could no longer be avoided. The goddess recalled that the decapitation skill had not been created as a method for slaying monsters in battle. Instead, its true purpose was to allow someone to collect the heads of creatures that had already died, so they could gather useful materials from them. The goddess reflected on her history, which was marked by losses, and came to understand that expecting farmers to become fighters had been a mistake from the beginning. She recognized that adjusting the ability had truly been the wisest decision they could make given the situation. Had there been a single, exceptionally powerful individual within their group, the outcome might have been entirely different. However, fortune did not favor them that day. Without warning, her concentration shattered as Xian strode toward her, his eyes filled with resolve that hinted he was on the verge of making a life-altering choice. He broke through her contemplation, wearing a harmless grin, and politely requested another helping of apples. The goddess let out a weary breath, silently questioning what wrongdoing had led fate to place in her care a boy whose greatest worry seemed to be satisfying his hunger. She concluded that he belonged to her now, and with no way to return him, she resolved to keep him by her side forever. Without warning, she wrapped her arms tightly around his leg. Shan's heart raced with anxiety as she questioned whether she might end up consuming him just as she had swallowed the apple. Once the apples had been collected and placed into a spacious bag, he cradled the slumbering goddess in his arms, realizing she was likely exhausted after a long day spent growing and observing his efforts. He gently set her down in a secure place, then acknowledged his efforts, expressing that, too, had worked diligently and was worthy of recognition. Without warning, a loud burst of thunder shattered the calmness of the clear sky, sending a wave of fear through him. He feared that the noise could have disturbed the goddess from her slumber. He quickly understood that the noise he heard was not thunder after all, but the loud rumbling of his own stomach, which was complaining because he had spent the entire day eating nothing except apples. Without warning, a system notification popped up, revealing that a delivery event was currently. He hadn't expected to find a delivery service in such a barren land, yet he reasoned that it made sense, considering all the oddities that had arrived from Earth. Despite his confusion, he questioned how it was even possible for them to track him down just to give him an assignment. He observed the weariness on his face, and proposed that they get some rest before tackling the mysteries of the universe the next day. He gently placed a layer of leaves over the goddess, using them as a makeshift blanket to keep her warm for the time being. In another location altogether, there stood a grand and towering structure known as the Temple of Circulation. A woman strode forward, her posture radiating both determination and frustration. A person burst into the office where an employee was working. Her supervisor, noticing her presence, questioned her about why she was not out completing the delivery task she had been given. She shot back with irritation, blaming him for bothering her and explaining that she was already overwhelmed with work, finding his new demand completely unreasonable. The specifics of the troublesome assignment unfolded in front of her. She faced a 2-day work trip to a forbidden zone, fully aware that no payment would come since a free shipping promotion was in effect. To make matters worse, the client insisted on offering apples as compensation, unable to provide any actual money. She wondered aloud to her supervisor whether she had made a mistake to deserve such treatment, but he reassured her that she was not at fault. Instead, she simply displayed an exceptional level of excitement and dedication in her work. He mentioned his own fondness for work, but expressed concern that excessive overtime could negatively affect her well-being, so he recommended she treat this business trip as a much-needed break. He rested his hand gently on her shoulder, explaining that if she remained in this place, she would end up working again. He encouraged her instead to leave for a while and enjoy herself in a limited-access area, believing it would do her good. She came to understand the harsh reality and acknowledged to him that she was aware he had chosen her for the trip, because nobody else would have been willing to accept such an offer. Amused by her honesty, he confessed with a chuckle that she was absolutely right. He tried to lighten the mood by suggesting, with a playful tone, that she could stumble upon a secret world filled with unique features, hoping this would make their task seem more exciting. The worker wished Jin a safe journey, and though she agreed to leave, she quietly muttered about her misfortune. Jin glanced over the lengthy order list, which reminded her of something a child might dream up, puzzled by the sheer number of requests. She realized she needed to get ready carefully, especially since this trip would take her into a restricted zone. With a determined grip, she tightened her fist, silently wishing that her hard work would pay off and she would come back carrying juicy apples. At the same time, Shan enjoyed himself immensely, laughing and playing with, and the goddess as they relaxed together amid heaps of freshly picked apples. Struggled to stifle its laughter, doing its best to remain unnoticed. Caught the sound without any difficulty. With a light-hearted spirit, they moved toward it, their actions full of playful energy. He reached out and seized. They began to playfully reprimand the creature for snacking on the apples. These were the sole resources they possessed. He pointed out to the creature that the apples were meant to be traded, not eaten, and worried about how they would meet their anticipated guest later that day if it kept consuming their goods like this. He exhaled anxiously, concerned about leaving a negative impression during his initial business meeting in this unfamiliar world. He remembered what he had discovered while arranging the delivery, realizing that this world was separated into different sections known as blocks. Despite appearing to be ordinary land, invisible boundaries marked the edges. Traveling from one to the other would probably mean buying a costly ticket for daily transportation. The place where he lived was cut off from the rest of the world. The closest village could only be reached after traveling for an entire week on foot, and from that point forward, he would have little to eat besides apples for the remainder of his days. He considered it almost miraculous when the delivery service managed to arrive in only 2 days. He remained unaware of their chosen method, yet he looked forward to the swift arrival of his sleeping bag, or even better, a proper bed, so he could begin enjoying a more comfortable life. He explained that he had arranged for a uniquely cozy pillow to be delivered for the goddess's comfort. He knew he had to slowly win her approval, fearing that if he failed, her anger might consume him entirely. Without warning, he became aware that something was drawing near. Since the previous day, he had come to understand that the monsters had started approaching him without any prompting. The arrival felt precisely timed, almost like a dedicated service bringing monsters right to their door. This discovery validated his suspicion that these creatures possessed immortality, repeatedly resurrecting no matter how many times they were defeated. Shan made up his mind to dispose of the garbage ahead of his guest's arrival. He confronted his opponents with remarkable expertise, wielding his reliable sickle. He observed that they were now moving with slightly more speed than earlier. They questioned whether the monsters had been growing more powerful as time passed. He noticed that progress remained very limited. There was no reason to worry. He kept dispatching his opponents effortlessly, treating them as though they were nothing more than troublesome weeds in his path. Just then, Jin appeared in the vicinity, soaring in with the help of her high-tech boots fitted with wings. She gazed downward, her eyes widening as she took in the ghastly sight beneath her, overwhelmed by a mixture of disbelief and astonishment. She spotted Shan, his unsettling grin stretching across his face as he stood among the lifeless bodies and shattered remnants of the monsters he had recently defeated.